Racist cops slap the wrong black judge. What happens next shatters their world. A slap in court or the spark that ignites a reckoning. When two racist cops strike a quiet black woman in a packed courtroom, they think it's just another abuse of power. What they don't realize is that she's no bystander. She is the judge. And in the next 4 minutes, everything they've built begins to crumble. This is a story of arrogance, injustice, and a brand of justice that doesn't whisper. It roars. Stick around because the twist? You won't believe it until you see it. Let us know where you're watching from and what time you found this. We read every single comment. Charleston, South Carolina, had always felt like a city at war with itself. Graceful architecture, cobblestone streets, and whispers of an old world barely masked the deep, unresolved tensions beneath. The sun had barely crested the Atlantic horizon when Judge Clara May arrived at the courthouse. At 62, she carried herself with a quiet authority that required no introduction. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her sharp brown eyes missed nothing. Not even the microaggressions people assumed they could get away with. This courthouse, cold and towering with its neoclassical columns, had witnessed centuries of both justice and injustice. Clara had walked its marble halls for over 3 decades, first as a defense attorney, fighting uphill battles for clients whose only real crime was being poor and black. Then, as a prosecutor determined to root out the rot from within the system. And now, as a judge, the first black woman to sit on the city's highest bench. Some people still hadn't accepted that. Clara knew the cost of breaking ceilings. They didn't just throw stones at you, they pretended you weren't even there. As she stepped through the security checkpoint, the guards nodded respectfully, some even offering slight smiles. Clara responded with a curt nod, her mind already on the morning docket. It was supposed to be a routine arraignment, vandalism, juvenile defendant, bond hearing, but her instincts, those honed over decades, tingled. Something felt off. The clerk outside her courtroom greeted her with a strained smile. "Good morning, Judge May. Officer Boone's already inside." Clara paused. "Boone?" "Yes, ma'am. Sergeant Travis Boone. Arresting officer in the Jameson case. He's been insistent." Clara's jaw tightened. She knew Boone. Everyone in Charleston law enforcement knew Boone. Mid-40s, clean-cut, third-generation cop. A walking legacy of unchecked power. The kind of man who wore a smirk like part of his uniform. The kind who had enough favors banked across departments to stay afloat, no matter how many complaints stacked up against him. And there were plenty: harassment, excessive force, misconduct, always swept away like dust under a marble rug. Clara had seen his name in too many reports that reeked of arrogance. She entered the courtroom quietly, not yet in her robe, not yet seated at the bench. Boone was already at the prosecution table, arms crossed, his expression sour. The teenager he had arrested, a boy no older than 16, sat beside his public defender, his eyes wide and uncertain. Boone didn't acknowledge Clara as she entered. Instead, he barked toward the clerk. "Let's get this started. I don't have all day." "I suggest you find the time," Clara said evenly. Boone finally turned, his gaze settling on her. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. He was trying to place her. Clerk? Assistant? Bailiff? She wasn't robed. She wasn't seated. To him, that meant she wasn't important. "You here for the defense?" he asked smugly. Clara didn't respond. She moved toward the side table, glancing at a file left there. The room was mostly empty. Just a few early arriving journalists, a handful of attorneys, and 2 officers standing near the back wall. Boone, now clearly irritated, stormed toward her. "Hey, I'm talking to you," I said. And then it happened. A sharp, open-handed slap cracked through the air. The room froze. A collective gasp rippled through those present. Papers stopped rustling. A coffee cup nearly slipped from someone's hand. Even the fluorescent lights overhead seemed to flicker in response. Clara didn't move. Her cheek burned, but she didn't reach for it. Didn't flinch. Slowly, she turned her head, locking eyes with the man who had just put his hands on her. Boone stepped back, momentarily startled by his own action, but not ashamed. "Not even close," he muttered, his lips curling with something bordering on contempt. "You people need to learn some respect." A hushed, "Oh my God," escaped from somewhere in the back. Another voice whispered, "Is she okay?" But Clara's gaze never wavered. Not for a second. Boone straightened, oblivious to the trap he had just sprung for himself. "I don't care who you think you are," he sneered. "You don't get to strut around this courtroom acting like—" Clara took a step forward. Then another. The silence tightened around them like a noose. The clerk whispered, She's not in her robe." But Boone wasn't paying attention. He didn't notice the shift in the room, the dawning horror spreading across the faces around him. And then Clara spoke, calmly, coldly, with every ounce of authority that no robe could grant her. "Is this how you treat officers of the court, Sergeant?" One of the officers in the back paled. A lawyer dropped their pen. Boone blinked. "What are you talking about?" Clara stepped onto the platform. Then she turned to face him from the bench. For one long, shattering moment, nobody breathed. "Sergeant." Boone stood frozen, his eyes locked on Judge Clara May as she took her seat behind the bench. The gavel hadn't even struck wood yet, but the judgment had already begun. He blinked twice, once in disbelief, the second time because, for the first time in his career, he felt fear. Clara clasped her hands together, slow and deliberate. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she let the silence press down on everyone in the room. Even Bailiff Officer Mills, a steadfast man who had served with discipline for years, seemed to be holding his breath. "Sergeant Boone," Clara finally said, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut. "Did you just strike me in this courtroom?" Boone's mouth opened, then shut. His tongue flicked to the side of his mouth, searching for an excuse that wouldn't come. I didn't know who you were," he muttered, already on the defensive. "That is not what I asked," Clara interjected, slicing cleanly through his feeble attempt at justification. "Did you or did you not put your hands on me? Answer the question, yes or no." A shift rippled through the gallery. Someone, perhaps a junior attorney, had already pulled out their phone. Cameras were rolling. This wasn't just an act of misconduct anymore. It was becoming evidence. Boone puffed up his chest, raising his voice in an attempt to reclaim control. "You approached me. I didn't recognize you. You weren't in your robe, I thought. You thought I was beneath you," Clara interrupted, her words landing like a hammer. Boone's jaw tightened. "You're twisting this into something it's not." "I'm not twisting anything," she replied, unwavering. "I'm stating exactly what happened. You assaulted a woman without provocation, in a courtroom, and your only defense is ignorance and arrogance." He stepped forward, then seemed to remember where he was and hesitated. His eyes flicked to the officers standing at the back of the room, searching for backup. No one met his gaze. Clara's voice dropped, quieter now, but sharper still. "If I were a white male judge sitting here with the same title, would you have struck me before knowing who I was?" Boone didn't answer, but his silence was the loudest admission of guilt he had ever given. "I'll take that as a no," she said coldly. "And now, after assaulting a sitting judge, your response is defiance." "You're overreacting," he snapped at last. "I was doing my job. That kid," he jabbed a finger toward the defendant, a thin, anxious teenager who looked ready to shrink behind his lawyer's chair, "is a thug. I caught him with spray paint and—" "Enough." Clara's voice cracked like a whip, followed by the sharp slam of the gavel. Once, twice. "You do not get to justify assault by pointing fingers at a juvenile defendant," she said. She turned to the clerk, her tone crisp. "Ms. Harper, please enter into the record that Officer Travis Boone has admitted, on the record, to striking a sitting judge in a courtroom without cause or provocation." Boone took a step back. The realization was settling in now, sinking like lead in his chest. This wouldn't be swept under the rug like before. No union rep was going to step in and make this disappear. Not this time. Clara glanced toward the bailiff. "Officer Mills, Is this courtroom currently under video surveillance? Yes, Your Honor, he replied immediately, his voice taut. Good. Then the record will also reflect visual evidence. Boone's eyes darted toward the corners of the ceiling, where two small red recording lights blinked back at him. His expression shifted. For the first time, he wasn't just angry. He was afraid. I didn't mean, he started again, but Clara lifted a hand, silencing him instantly. You've had 20 years of not meaning it, she said. I've read your file. I've seen the complaints. I've seen how they vanished. She took a step forward, her gaze fixed on him. But here's the difference today, Sergeant. This happened in front of witnesses, under cameras, to a judge. Boone opened his mouth, but she didn't let him speak. I have spent my life watching men like you mistake force for law, mistake fear for order, mistake silence for consent. She straightened. Not today. The entire room seemed to brace itself as she stood from the bench. In accordance with the authority vested in me as a circuit judge for the state of South Carolina, she declared, and under Title 16, Chapter 3, Article 1 of the South Carolina Code of Laws, I hereby place Officer Travis Boone under formal judicial investigation for criminal assault on a public official. A gasp rippled through the back of the courtroom. Clara turned to the bailiff. Officer Mills, place Sergeant Boone under temporary detainment. Do not apply cuffs yet. He is still a sworn officer, and I expect professionalism. But he is not to leave this room. Boone's face contorted in disbelief. You can't be serious, he blurted. His chest rose and fell sharply. I didn't even know. And yet, Clara said quietly, unblinking, you knew enough to strike me. Boone's frantic gaze darted around the room, but there were no allies, no defense, just the slow tightening of the noose he had tied for himself. The sound of the courtroom doors closing behind the bailiff rang out like a gunshot. Officer Mills stood near Boone, his hand resting lightly on his belt. Not in a threatening way, but with clear intent. Boone remained rigid, his face flushed red, his jaw locked tight, his fists clenching at his sides as if he were struggling to hold back an eruption of rage. Clara didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She gave him no exit, no path to denial. Your Honor, the voice came from the gallery. It was the prosecutor assigned to the vandalism case, an older white man, his thinning hair now seeming even paler. Do you wish to proceed with the docket? Clara turned toward him slowly. I will determine that momentarily, she said. But first, I want to address the gallery. Her gaze swept across the room. Because what just happened here is no longer a matter of courtroom decorum. It is a matter of law, precedent, and public trust. The journalists, you all witnessed an on-duty officer physically assault the judge presiding over this courtroom. You heard his words. You saw his stance. I want you to document that. I want you to remember it. Because if the law cannot protect those who uphold it fairly, then we are no longer in a democracy. We are in something much darker. The room was utterly silent. Even the faint tapping of keyboards had ceased. Boone scoffed, unable to stop himself. Are you really turning this into some kind of press spectacle? Clara slowly turned to him. Is that what you think this is, Sergeant? Public accountability. A performance. He didn't respond. She stepped down from the bench, descending the stairs with deliberate steps, her heels striking the floor like a clock ticking down. You've been protected for a long time, haven't you? She said softly, her voice just low enough that only those nearby could hear, but the microphone still picked up every word. I've seen officers like you before, the kind who walk into a courtroom assuming everyone inside it is beneath them, the kind who say, I didn't know, when they really mean, I didn't care. Boone's eyes darted nervously toward Mills, but the bailiff didn't move. Let me tell you what's about to happen, Clara continued. Internal Affairs is being notified. I will personally submit a formal complaint to the Attorney General's office before noon. The footage of this incident will be sealed for legal review. But the press in this room, they already have enough to make it headline news before lunch. Boone's mouth opened. You're ruining my life over a misunderstanding. No, Sergeant, Clara said sharply. You ended your own career the moment your hand struck my face. There it was. Sharp. Final. Boone shifted uneasily, glancing toward the teenager he had arrested. The boy was watching him now, not with fear, not anymore, with something else, something Boone couldn't quite place. Pity. It was the same expression he had seen in mugshots of men he had arrested, right before the cuffs went on. I've served this city for 20 years, Boone said, louder now, his tone almost pleading. I've risked my life on these streets. I've put away real criminals. And now you're throwing me to the wolves over one mistake in a tense moment. Clara turned, walking back up to the bench. I'm not throwing you to the wolves, Sergeant, she said as she ascended the steps. I'm handing you to the law. She reached her seat and settled into it, her robe folding neatly around her like armor. For 20 years, you've hidden behind a badge, she continued. But today, that badge doesn't protect you. It holds you accountable. She tapped the microphone once, then addressed the courtroom. This court is not adjourned, she stated. However, the arraignment for the defendant in the vandalism case will be rescheduled for tomorrow. The arresting officer has compromised the integrity of this hearing. The defense attorney adjusted his tie nervously. Thank you, Your Honor. Clara nodded. Take your client through the west exit. Ensure his safe departure. The boy stood, glancing once more at Boone before walking out. His face was unreadable, but something in his posture had changed. He was no longer cowering, no longer apologetic. Boone, meanwhile, had gone quiet. The fire in his eyes had dimmed. Instead, they darted, calculating, assessing, waiting. Clara studied him the way one might observe a dangerous animal that had just realized it was trapped. Then, she leaned into the microphone once more. Officer Mills, please escort Sergeant Boone to holding room B. I will be contacting Internal Affairs and the Chief of Police myself. This matter is no longer internal, it is criminal. Boone didn't resist, but his jaw was clenched so tightly that the muscles in his face tensed audibly. As Mills gently tapped his elbow, guiding him toward the side exit, Boone muttered just loud enough for Clara to hear. You think you've won, don't you? Clara didn't look at him. She simply whispered, I think, for once, the right person is losing, and the courtroom doors shut behind him. Outside, the hallway buzzed with electricity. Word had already begun to spread. A judge had been assaulted by a cop. Not just any cop, Travis Boone. And not just any judge, Clara May. By the time Clara stepped into her chambers, 2 voicemails were already waiting. One from the Chief of Police's office, the other from a contact at Internal Affairs. She didn't listen to them. Not yet. Instead, she removed her robe with steady hands and placed it carefully on the hanger by the door. Then, she looked at herself in the mirror. The red mark on her cheek had faded to a faint line, but it was still there. She stared at it for a long time, not because it hurt, but because she wanted to remember how it felt. How many people had walked out of this courthouse with far worse marks, on their skin, on their dignity, and had never been given a moment like this? How many had been ignored, dismissed, silenced? A sharp knock pulled her from her thoughts. Carter Lang, her bailiff of nearly a decade, broad-shouldered, stone-faced, but fiercely loyal. He stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back as always, but there was a tension in his posture that hadn't been there before. They've taken him to holding room B, Carter said. Internal Affairs is sending 2 agents. ETA 20 minutes. Clara nodded. Thank you. Carter hesitated. Judge, I heard from one of the clerks. Boone's union has already made a call. They're moving fast, trying to contain it. Of course they are, Clara said, but she didn't sound surprised. She sounded certain, and she didn't take her eyes off the mirror when she added, but they're too late. This isn't going away. She walked behind her desk, sat down, and pulled a yellow legal pad from the drawer. Her handwriting was precise, almost architectural. She began listing: incident, courtroom assault, status, on record, witnesses present, yes, cameras active, yes, officer's record, prior complaints, 5 documented in the last 7 years. Connection: ADA Ramsey's office. Approved dismissal of 2 previous excessive force cases involving Boone. Judge's notes. Request review of dismissed cases. Carter stood silently, watching, until Clara finally looked up. I want every case where Boone was the lead arresting officer or testified in the last 10 years pulled and flagged. That'll be a lot, Carter said. Clara's eyes narrowed. Then we'd better start now. Carter gave a slow nod, then turned to leave. But just as his hand reached for the door, Clara spoke again, her voice quiet. They think this was about a slap. Carter paused. They don't realize, she continued. They just opened the door we've been pounding on for years. The door clicked shut behind him. 30 minutes later, 2 internal affairs agents arrived. One was Agent Rosalind Keene, a no-nonsense black woman with a reputation for rooting out corruption. The other was Agent Felix Reyes, a sharp-eyed Latino man with an even sharper tone. Clara had met Keene before. She was known for one thing: cleaning house. Not of messes, but of misconduct. They sat across from her at the conference table. Keene flipped open a thick file already labeled Boone. Travis. We've been watching him for a while, Keene admitted. But his record is just clean enough to avoid action. Too many convenient absences of evidence. Too many cases closed without follow-up. Convenient, Clara muttered. That word should be a felony. Reyes leaned forward. Your courtroom surveillance is already backed up on our servers, audio and video. We've confirmed the assault, the statements, and your response. We've also noted exactly who was present. The chain of accountability is about to be tested. I want more than accountability, Clara said. I want the foundation cracked wide open. Keene studied her. Judge, how far are you willing to take this? Clara didn't hesitate. All the way. Reyes gave a slow nod. Then I think it's time we show you something. He pulled a thumb drive from his pocket, inserted it into his tablet, and turned the screen toward her. An internal report from 2019. A civilian complaint. Anonymous. The accusation was brutal. Boone had beaten a 17-year-old boy during an arrest, doctored the body cam footage, and the original video had mysteriously vanished. The case had been quietly closed due to lack of evidence. Clara scrolled down and stopped cold. The internal reviewer who dismissed the complaint? Detective M. Whitaker. She looked up. As in Captain Whitaker? Reyes nodded. Boone's former training officer. Retired last year. But the entire command staff under him? Still in place. And, Keene added, we found 3 more dismissed complaints. Same patterns. Same signatures. Boone's name is always there. And so is someone else's. She tapped the screen, and a new name appeared. ADA Carson E. Ramsey. The same prosecutor who had been assigned to dozens of Boone's cases. Who had sat in this very courtroom more times than Clara could count. Who always seemed just a little too eager to strike deals with law enforcement. And who, now that Clara thought about it, had once given Boone a sly pat on the back after a particularly shaky testimony. Clara leaned back in her chair, her pulse steady but her mind racing. This wasn't just about a violent cop. This was a system, a network. Boone wasn't the rot. He was just the smell. Keene's voice cut through the silence. What do you want to do, Judge? Clara met their eyes. Her voice was quiet but unyielding. I want a list, she said. Every case Boone touched, every complaint buried, every prosecutor who helped make them disappear. And I want it on my desk by sunrise. Reyes raised an eyebrow. That'll take all night. Then don't stop working. Keene's lips curled slightly. I think we're going to get along just fine. By 6 a.m., the courthouse was awake, but barely. The halls were eerily silent. The only sounds the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the distant swish of a janitor's mop. Inside Judge Clara May's chambers, no one had slept. Not her. Not her clerk. Not the internal affairs agents who had spent the night digging through a decade's worth of sealed complaints. Carter arrived with coffee and wordless understanding. He placed a steaming cup on Clara's desk, then took a seat in the corner, flipping open a file so thick it could jam a printer. Clara didn't look up from her legal pad. How bad is it? Carter finally asked, though he already knew. Clara didn't pause in her writing. 19 complaints, all involving Boone. 12 against other officers under his supervision. For prosecutors who refused to press charges despite overwhelming evidence. At least 2 body cam videos that mysteriously vanished under internal review. Carter exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. That's not a bad apple, he muttered. That's a rotting orchard. Clara finally looked up. Her eyes were dark, steady. And it's been protected, buried, maintained, systematically. Before Carter could respond, the office phone rang. Clara answered with a curt, "Judge Mays." The voice on the other end was calm, male, and disturbingly familiar. "Clara, it's Chief Nolan." She leaned back. "I was expecting your call, though not this early. I assume you know why I'm calling," he said, his voice low, measured. "I assume you've seen the footage," she replied. A pause. "I have." Another pause. "I'm not calling to defend Boone," he added. "No," Clara said. "You're calling to control the explosion." Nolan didn't deny it. "Clara," he said quietly, "you need to understand what you're stepping into. This isn't about one officer losing his temper. You're pulling on a thread that could unravel this entire department." "That's exactly the point," she replied without hesitation. "I'm not your enemy," he said. "You've been silent for years," Clara shot back. "Silence is complicity, Chief." He sighed on the other end of the line. "I've got the union breathing down my neck, the mayor demanding answers. And now I hear you've contacted Internal Affairs directly. Because your department didn't," she said flatly. "You're escalating this," Nolan pressed.
No, Clara corrected.
"I'm exposing it." There was a beat of silence, and then his tone shifted, sharper, less diplomatic. "Look," Nolan said, "you want Boone to face charges? Fine. He's a liability. I'll back your request. But if you keep dragging in commanders, prosecutors, past leadership, you're going to set off a collapse none of us can contain." Clara's voice didn't waver. "Then maybe it's time we stop trying to contain it and start rebuilding." The line went dead. She stared at the phone for a long moment before quietly placing it back in the cradle. Carter raised an eyebrow. That sounded like a threat wrapped in a peace offering. Clara nodded. "He's scared." "Good." Just then, her door swung open without a knock. Agent Keene entered, her face grim, a slim red file in hand. She wasted no time. "We found something you need to see." Clara stood, meeting her halfway as Keene flipped the folder open. A transcript, an audio recording, surveillance audio from the precinct, dated 2 years ago. Boone's voice, unmistakable, laughing in a locker room. "You ever see her up close? That judge, Clara, walks around like she owns the courthouse. Thinks the robe makes her bulletproof." Another voice, still unidentified. "She ever come after you?" Boone laughed again. "Let her try. I've got friends higher than her. She steps too far, and I swear she'll never even make it to the bench." One complaint and poof, activists judge out the door. Clara's eyes scanned the page, then lifted to Keene. "Who else heard this?" "We just pulled it. It was flagged under another investigation, buried in non-priority files." "And the second voice?" "We're running voice recognition, but we believe it may be Ada Ramsey." Clara's pulse ticked once in her throat. "If you can confirm that." "We will," Keene assured her. "But there's more." She pulled out another document, a list of recent internal case reviews. "There was an emergency meeting at the DA's office last night," Keene said. "Someone's trying to pull your case from the bench, claiming a conflict of interest, arguing that you can't preside over a case where you're the victim." Clara's jaw tightened. "They're trying to remove me." Carter muttered a curse under his breath. Keene nodded. "If they succeed, Boone gets slapped with a minor misconduct charge and cut loose with early retirement. You get recused, and the narrative shifts. You're emotionally compromised." Clara walked back to her desk. The clock on the wall read 7:02 a.m. The courthouse would officially open in less than an hour. "I want a public hearing," she said. "I want the press there. I want the record to show that I requested the transfer, not because I couldn't be impartial, but because I refused to let this be buried." Keene gave a slow, approving nod. "You want to go on the offensive?" Clara met her gaze, eyes burning. "No," she said. "I want to go nuclear." Outside her chambers, the courthouse was coming to life. Staff arrived. Phones rang. Journalists gathered like birds sensing an oncoming storm. From behind the blinds, Clara spotted a black SUV parked across the street. Watching, waiting. Someone was coming for her. But they'd better come prepared, because the moment they tried to silence her, she'd make damn sure the whole city heard her scream. By 9 a.m., the courthouse felt like a pressure cooker. Reporters loitered in the corridors. Court clerks whispered in doorways. Attorneys avoided eye contact. Everyone felt it. Something was unraveling. Judge Clara May stepped into the main courtroom, flanked by Bailiff Carter and Internal Affairs Agent Rosalind Keene. She was not in her robe. She wasn't presiding today. Today she was fighting. The hum of conversation faded as she entered. At the far end of the room stood Assistant District Attorney Carson Ramsey. Beside him, a representative from the State Ethics Board, a young white man in a tailored gray suit. His posture stiff, his expression unreadable. His name tag read Elliot Parrish, but everything about him said Hatchet Man. "Judge May," he greeted with a tight smile. "We've received your request for a public hearing regarding your recusal. I'm here to clarify it," Clara replied, her voice steady, "and to make it part of the public record." They sat. The press leaned in from the back rows. "I've reviewed the argument filed by the DA's office," Clara began. "It claims that I am emotionally compromised and potentially biased due to the incident involving Officer Boone." Ramsey didn't flinch. "Our concern is purely procedural. You were the victim of an alleged crime committed by the defendant. Under state statute, a judge may recuse themselves to preserve impartiality." "I am fully aware of the statute," Clara interrupted, "which is why I am choosing to step down from Boone's arraignment. Not because I am compromised, but because I refuse to let this case be quietly diluted." She turned to the press, her gaze locking onto a young black female journalist in the front row. "I am requesting that the Boone case be elevated to special review status. I am also formally requesting that an independent federal monitor be assigned to investigate the handling of previous cases involving Officer Boone and his direct collaborators." A murmur swept through the courtroom. Ramsey leaned forward. "Judge, I caution you. This is not the forum to suggest conspiracy." "I'm not suggesting it," Clara said, her voice like ice. "I'm proving it." She handed a file to Agent Keene, who placed it on the table between them and flipped it open. "For the record," Keene announced. Inside, 3 complaints, 5 sealed memos, 2 missing body cam logs, a court transcript from a juvenile trial in 2018. Each one bore Carson Ramsey's signature. Clara's gaze never wavered. "You declined to prosecute Boone in 5 separate cases." Clara spoke, her voice unwavering. "Despite documented excessive force and contradictory statements under oath, in every one of those cases, the defense was pressured into accepting plea deals. Many of those defendants were young black men, most without legal representation." Ramsey went pale but said nothing. Keene placed a second document on the table and slid it toward Elliot Parrish, the ethics board representative. "And here's a wire transfer, Mr. Parrish," she said coolly. "A $15,000 contribution to the state judicial endowment from an entity linked to the Charleston Police Benevolent Fund. That money was supposed to fund a scholarship program. Instead, half of it was funneled into a legal defense fund, used last year for Officer Boone." Parrish swallowed hard. "That's not relevant to the ethics motion." "It is if it proves collusion," Clara countered. "If public funds are being funneled into shielding corrupt officers from accountability, then it's more than relevant, it's a pattern. And I'm naming it right now." She turned her attention back to Ramsey. "Tell me, Mr. Ramsey," she pressed, "who covered for Boone when the body cam footage vanished in 2019? The footage from the night a minor ended up in the hospital. Ramsey opened his mouth, then closed it. Clara waited. Keen answered instead. "We believe the footage wasn't lost," she said. "It was rerouted." Clara raised an eyebrow. "To where?" Keen slid a slip of paper across the table. "To an external server, one owned by a private security contractor based in Atlanta. That contractor has a standing retainer agreement with the Charleston mayor's office." Clara's gaze locked onto Ramsey. "And who approved that contract?" Ramsey said nothing. Keen delivered the final blow. "You did." The room exploded. Shouts, flashing cameras, reporters scrambling to capture every word. People stood, whispering urgently among themselves. Ramsey shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is character assassination," he barked. Clara met his fury with cold resolve. "No," she said. "This is exposure, and it's long overdue." Parrish rose, visibly shaken. I need time to process this information." "You'll have it," Clara said. "But let the record reflect that I am voluntarily recusing myself to protect the integrity of this process. Not because I was pressured, not because I was intimidated, and certainly not because I will be silent." Then she turned to the reporters, her voice ringing through the chamber like a bell. "This city has upheld a system of unchecked power for far too long. Today is not about a slap on the wrist. It's about what happens when someone believes they can act without consequence, because every layer above them is willing to look the other way." She looked directly at Ramsey. "Those layers are crumbling." Ramsey stormed out, already dialing his phone. Parrish followed close behind, his face drawn tight with anxiety. Clara turned to Keen and Carter, exhaling slowly. "You think they'll come after you?" Carter asked quietly. Clara didn't hesitate. "They already have." Just then, her phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. "You need to stop." No name, no threat, just 5 chilling words. She turned the screen toward Keen. Keen read it, then smirked. "Good," she said. "That means we're hitting nerves." Clara glanced out the courtroom window, past the towering city buildings, the offices, the rooftops, the secrets buried within them. She wasn't just prosecuting a cop anymore. She was dismantling a machine. And somewhere inside that machine, someone very powerful was watching. The cell was colder than Boone expected. Not physically, the concrete bench was uncomfortable but bearable. No, this was a different kind of cold. The kind that seeped into a man's bones when he realized the world had moved on without him.
No ball.
No gun.
No shield.
Just 4 gray walls and the growing awareness that, for the first time in his career, no one was coming to clean up his mess. Boone stared at his hands. Strong hands. The same hands that had once yanked a drug dealer off a porch in North Charleston. Broken up fights behind warehouses. Written up reports. Testified in court with unwavering confidence. Hands that had commanded respect. Or fear. Now they trembled. The guard outside hadn't spoken in over an hour.
No friendly nods. No fond remarks.
Just a clenched jaw and eyes that refused to meet Boone's. Even here, he was alone. Boone shot to his feet, pacing the tiny space like a caged animal. He had spent his whole career believing he was untouchable. That no matter how bad things got, someone higher up would always take care of it. And usually they did. But this time, he slammed his fist against the wall. Not hard enough to break bone. Just hard enough to remind himself he was still alive. Suddenly, the lock clicked. The door swung open. A man in a gray suit stepped inside. Older. Bald. Cold. Boone stiffened. "Who the hell are you?" The man shut the door behind him, offering no name. Instead, he tossed a file onto the bench. "Your lifeline," he said. "Or your anchor." Boone scowled. "I don't do cryptic." "Then I'll be direct." The man's voice was smooth, detached. "I represent interests that are deeply concerned with what Judge May is stirring up. You've been useful in the past, Sergeant. But now, you're a liability." Boone bristled. "A liability? I gave everything to this department. And that," the man said coolly, "is the only reason they haven't fed you to the wolves yet." Boone narrowed his eyes. Then what do you want from me? The man smiled faintly. Remind them who you are. He gestured toward the file. Boone hesitated, then opened it. Pages of notes.
Surveillance photo.
Judge Clara May's home address. Family history. Old photographs. One of her with her late husband, a former attorney, now deceased. Boone's pulse quickened. This is surveillance, he muttered. No, the man corrected. This is leverage. Boone took a step back. Are you out of your damn mind? You want me to threaten a judge? The man's expression didn't change. No, he said calmly. We want you to warn her. Subtly. She's too bold right now. She needs a reminder that power doesn't come from robes or courtrooms. His gaze darkened. It comes from fear. Boone stared at him. This wasn't a lifeline. It was a dare. If I do this, Boone said slowly, what do I get? The man tapped the file. A way out, he said. One that keeps you out of federal prison. One that puts you on a private security payroll for a firm that never asks questions. He tapped the wall gently. Or, the meaning was clear. Boone swallowed hard. Boone stared at the file for a long while before picking it up. Across town, Clara moved through the courthouse halls as though walking into a storm. Her coat hung over her shoulders, and her heels clicked sharply on the floor. The press had returned in full force. Some nodded in her direction, while others whispered behind raised phones. Inside her chambers, Carter was already waiting. You didn't respond to my text, he said. I needed some space. You also have 6 voicemails, 3 from the mayor's office, 2 from the ethics board, and 1 from your sister. Clara raised an eyebrow. My sister. She saw you on the news, Carter replied. She said you looked taller. Clara allowed a faint smile, though the heaviness inside her remained. She sat behind her desk, scanning the latest file from Keene. Updates on ADA Ramsey and a redacted name linked to a questionable private contract. Before she could process it, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. 1 new message. She opened it. Nice house in empty Pleasant. Does your nephew still bike home alone from school? Clara froze, her hand going cold around the phone. The words blurred slightly, but the message was razor-sharp. She stood, walked to the door, and locked it. Carter noticed. What's wrong? She handed him the phone. He read it, his expression darkening instantly. That son of a... Don't say it, Clara said, walking to the window and staring out. Someone out there was trying to remind her of the rules, how this game had always been played, how women like her were meant to stay silent or face consequences. I need a name, she said, her voice steady. Whoever sent that message. Carter nodded. I'll get it. And Carter. Yeah. I want my nephew pulled from school quietly, and I want someone I trust watching my sister's house. Carter didn't argue. He simply picked up the phone and began dialing. That night, Boone was moved. Not released, not officially transferred, just relocated.
No paperwork. No explanation.
He walked through the back corridors of the precinct as if smuggled through enemy territory. He was handed a burner phone, an unregistered car, and a name, Clara Mays. The man from earlier appeared again, leaning into the car window. One warning, he said. Clean, subtle. You don't touch her. You don't even see her. You just make her feel it. Boone started the engine. I've been making people feel things my whole life, he muttered, and then he vanished into the Charleston night. The next morning, Clara received a package. No return address, no label. Inside was a photograph of her nephew, taken 2 days ago as he walked home from school. On the back, in jagged block letters, it read, Stay in your lane. Clara stood still for a long moment before picking up the phone. Get me the U.S. Marshal's office, she said. Whoever had just knocked on her door was about to learn what happens when a judge stops following the rules and starts creating her own. The federal building in downtown Charleston was designed like a fortress. Dull from the outside, cold on the inside, secured down to the last screw. That morning, Clara Mays sat across from 3 U.S. Marshals and 2 DOJ officials, each with open files and pens poised. She slid the photograph across the table. My nephew, she said calmly. Taken 2 days ago. Sent to me this morning in an unmarked envelope with a warning. One of the marshals, a tall, gray-haired man named Mercer, examined the photo without expression. You're certain it's him? Clara's voice didn't falter. I'm certain it came from someone acting in his interest. Boone doesn't send messages like this unless someone gives him the green light. The DOJ representative, a woman named Frances Kwan, raised an eyebrow. What exactly are you asking us for, Judge? Clara leaned forward. I want full protection for my family. I want Boone placed under federal custody by the end of the day. And I want an emergency judicial order freezing every case tied to his testimony for independent review.
Kwan nagsalat sharply.
That's going to shake Charleston's courts for months. Clara met her gaze without blinking. Then let them shake. No one argued. Within an hour, a team of marshals was dispatched to Boone's last known location, and Clara was back at the courthouse, not as a judge behind the bench, but as a force walking its halls with purpose. She met Agent Keene outside the district records room. Keene was holding a new folder. We traced the burner phone, she said. Boone used it twice last night, once to a number registered under a shell company in Atlanta. That company shares office space with a lobbying firm tied to your mayor's re-election campaign. Clara exhaled sharply. So the rot extends beyond the courts. Keene nodded grimly. Way beyond. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. You said the shell company was flagged before? Twice, Keene confirmed. First in a corruption probe 3 years ago, buried without action. The second 6 weeks ago, during a financial audit request made by a local journalist. Clara stiffened. Her name was Julia Spence. She disappeared 2 days later. Her body was found in her car, ruled an overdose. Clara's jaw tightened. Let me guess, she didn't have a history of drug use. Nope, Keene replied. She had a history of exposing corrupt officials. Clara stared down the hallway, fury building in her chest. Not the kind that made you scream, but the kind that made you plan. Find me everything that journalist was working on, she said. Every source, every file. If there's a thread she was pulling on, we're gonna rip it out of the wall. Keene hesitated. Judge, this may go far beyond Boone. Clara turned to her, voice quiet but resolute. I'm counting on it. Across the city, Boone's knuckles turned white against the steering wheel of his borrowed sedan. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't slept. His phone buzzed again and again with calls from unknown numbers, each one barking orders, warnings, or threats. Some were from handlers, others from old friends suddenly turning cold. He was running out of time. He had thought the photograph would rattle her, remind her that she didn't belong in the war. She had started, but instead, it awakened something inside her. Now he was the one being hunted. He pulled into a downtown parking garage, half empty and echoing. From the trunk, he retrieved a duffel bag, cash, a second burner, and a Glock. One he wasn't supposed to have. He wasn't going down without a fight. But before he could reach the stairwell, a voice behind him echoed off the concrete. Sergeant Boone. He spun around quickly, gun halfway drawn. For U.S. Marshals emerged from the shadows, guns already aimed. Put it down, Boone. He froze. For the first time, there was no bluff to play, no rescue on the way, no deal waiting in the back room. Boone dropped the bag, then the gun, and his knees hit the concrete with a dull, final thud. Back at the courthouse, Clara received the alert at 3:14 p.m. Boone was in federal custody, unarmed, arrested without incident. She didn't smile. There was no victory here, just confirmation. She was already in a meeting with Keene, Carter, and now DOJ Representative Frances Kwan, who had returned with reinforcements and a briefcase full of newly unsealed documents. We've reopened the Julia Spence file, Kwan said. The initial autopsy was inconclusive, but the coroner's report was altered after submission. Whoever changed it did so from a private login that no longer exists on record. Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. Somebody's been erasing the truth as if it's just pencil. Not anymore, Kwan replied. We've launched a joint task force. Internal affairs, federal investigators, and an external judicial review board. Boone's not talking yet, Keene added. But he will, Clara said, looking down at the files in front of her. The names, the cases, the patterns, a map of injustice, a blueprint of decay, and now, finally, a trail to accountability. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was starting to dip below the city's edge, casting golden light over the courthouse steps. She saw people gathered there, reporters, protesters, survivors. Some held signs with Boone's name, while others held photos of loved ones whose cases had never found justice. Carter stepped beside her. "You did it," he said softly. "No," she replied. "I just turned on the light." The roaches scattered. He smiled faintly. "What now?" She exhaled deeply. "Now we see how deep the tunnel goes." And deep it would go, because Boone wasn't the only one facing indictment, and Clara May wasn't done burning the house down. The press conference was set for 10 a.m., but by 9:30, the front steps of the Charleston courthouse were already packed. Local reporters, national correspondents, legal observers, survivors of police brutality, and citizens with signs that read, "Justice for all or justice for none." Judge Clara May stood at the edge of the window in her chambers, watching it unfold. She wore black, not her usual robes, but a fitted blazer over a deep charcoal blouse. No bench today, no barrier. She would face them standing, as a citizen and a fighter. "Boone's been moved to a secure facility," Keene said from behind her. "And he's talking." Clara turned to him. "How many?" Keene handed her a sheet. 12. 7 police officers, 2 ADA prosecutors, 1 retired captain, 1 city council member, and 1 shock that made Clara's throat tighten. Judge Benjamin Halcraftoft, a man she'd clerked under as a law student, a man who had mentored her, guided her, called her the future of Charleston law. She stared at his name as if it had been branded into her desk. "No," she whispered. "Ben." Carter leaned over her shoulder, jaw clenched. "That man swore you in." Keene was gentle but direct. He also signed off on at least 3 questionable case dismissals tied to Boone. One of them involved a civil rights complaint that disappeared before it even reached a hearing. Clara's hands balled into fists. "This goes deeper than crooked cops," she said. "This is institutional, judicial, political, generational." Keene nodded. "The kind of network that survives by feeding off silence." "Then we make noise," Clara replied. "Starting now." Outside, the cameras flashed as Clara stepped up to the podium. The crowd fell silent immediately. She looked out over the city, not just with resolve, but with heartbreak. "I became a judge because I believed in the promise of justice," she began. "But promises mean nothing if they are not kept. Today, I stand not just as a member of the court, but as a witness to what has been broken and what must be rebuilt." She paused, lifting the folder in her hand. This document contains the names of 12 individuals who, over the last decade, colluded to protect one another while abusing their authority. Some are police officers, some are attorneys, and one is a sitting judge. Gasps echoed. Shutters clicked. Phones went up. "I have submitted this list to federal investigators. I will not read them aloud here, not because I fear backlash, but because I believe in due process, something many of them denied to others." Her voice sharpened. "We are not here because of one man's slap. We are here because of what that slap revealed. A system built on fear, silence, and loyalty to everything but the truth." From the back, someone shouted, "We believe you, Judge May." Applause erupted, scattered at first, then growing louder. Carter stood just to her left, stone-faced but proud. Keene lingered near the crowd, his eyes scanning rooftops and alleys, alert for more than just applause. Because now that the names were public, Clara had painted a target on her back, and someone was already taking aim. That evening, as the courthouse emptied and the streets calmed, Clara returned to her chambers, exhausted but still burning. Her phone buzzed, a voicemail from a blocked number. She pressed play. "Clara?" Came a voice she hadn't heard in years, smooth, precise, and refined like a scalpel. It was Judge Halcrafttoft. I imagine by now you've seen my name on one of those lists, and I imagine you're feeling betrayed. But before you decide to destroy everything we've built, understand this. Some structures survive because they must. You take us all down. You take down the last bit of order this city has left. A pause. You don't want chaos, Clara. You don't want blood. Walk away while you still have that option, or you won't just lose your seat, you'll lose everything. The silence that followed was heavier than the threat itself. Carter walked in moments later. Did I just see a black SUV pull away from the loading dock? Clara looked at him. Halcrafttoft just called me. Carter's face hardened. Is he threatening you? No, he warned me. Which is worse? He crossed his arms. You're not backing down. Clara looked him straight in the eye. Not a chance. By midnight, it began. The first smear article appeared online. Judge Mays accused of improper conduct during 2009 case. No source, no evidence, just vague accusations and manufactured outrage. Then came the bots flooding social media with hashtags like #ActivistJudge and #MaysMustResign. Within hours, news outlets received anonymous tips about Clara's ties to radical organizations. A photo surfaced, Clara in college, fist raised at a protest. The caption twisted it into something darker. Even her nephew's school received a call from a concerned citizen, asking whether the boy was being indoctrinated. They weren't just coming after her name, they were coming after her bloodline. Clara sat in the dark, staring at the headlines, the screenshots, the digital poison. They're going to try to discredit everything, Carter said, arms crossed at the door. Burn your credibility, your legacy. Clara nodded slowly. Then we changed the rules. She stood, pulled open her drawer, and handed Carter a small black binder. What's this? Everything I've never said out loud, about Halcrafttoft, about cases that didn't sit right, about whispers I heard in back hallways and country club dinners. You wrote it all down? Of course I did, she said. I'm a judge. Documentation is survival. Carter flipped through the pages, eyes widening. Clara, this isn't just a defense. This is a nuclear weapon. I'm not just trying to survive anymore, she said softly. I'm going to make sure they can never hide again. As the city slept, files were duplicated, evidence archived, allies contacted. And in a quiet office overlooking Charleston, Judge Clara May prepared for the final trial, not of a man, but of the very machine that made men like him possible. 3 weeks later, the federal courthouse downtown was standing room only. Cameras lined the halls. Protesters and supporters packed the plaza. A perimeter of U.S. Marshals surrounded the building. Inside, the air was thick, not just with anticipation but with history. Clara May sat in the front row. Not on the bench, not behind the gavel, but as a witness, as a citizen on trial. Travis Boone. Charges: assault of a federal judge, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to suppress evidence, witness intimidation, and perjury. 5 felony counts. But Boone wasn't the only one in court. Behind closed doors, indictments had already been unsealed. ADA Carson Ramsey had resigned in disgrace and was negotiating a plea. Judge Halcrafttoft had been suspended pending a judicial investigation. 2 precinct captains had been fired. 3 officers had turned state's evidence. And the man who had approached Boone in the cell, the unnamed handler, the broker of threats, had vanished. The web had begun to unravel. And Clara? She had lit the match. The prosecutor rose first. Your Honor, the state calls Judge Clara Mays to the stand. The courtroom held its breath. Clara stood, walked calmly toward the witness box, and took her oath. She sat, composed, clear. The prosecutor approached. Judge Mays, he began. What happened on the morning of April 11th? Her voice rang through the courtroom. Not loud, but grounded, immovable. I was struck in the face by a man who believed I didn't belong. The prosecutor nodded. And what did that moment mean to you? Clara paused. It meant that the system I'd spent my life serving was no longer capable of protecting the people who served it. That respect, law, and truth had become negotiable, reserved only for those who fit a certain mold. She looked across the courtroom, not at Boone, but at the jury. But it also meant something else, that silence could no longer protect us. That if I didn't stand up, others would stay down. The prosecutor nodded. No further questions. Boone's lawyer approached, young, tense, overmatched. He fumbled through cross-examination. Judge Mays, do you think you're above the law? Clara looked at him as if he were a student asking why the sky was blue. No, I think I'm beneath it, like everyone else. That's the point. Laughter murmured through the crowd. The judge banged his gavel once. The defense attorney tried again. Do you admit that you brought personal bias into this investigation? I brought truth, Clara said. And if that truth is uncomfortable, that's not bias. That's justice doing its job. The jury watched her unblinking. Boone watched her too. This time not with rage, but with the hollow look of a man who finally knew it was over. The verdict came 2 days later. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing would follow. But Boone was no longer the headline. The ripple effect had turned into a wave. A week later, a statewide investigation was launched into judicial misconduct. Over 140 past convictions were placed under review. A civil rights commission began auditing officer complaint procedures. The governor called for a bipartisan reform task force, and the Charleston Police Department came under full federal oversight. It was a rainy Thursday when Clara returned to the same courtroom where it all began. The slap still echoed in that space, if only in memory. But everything else had changed. She stood alone before the bench, staring at the chair she had once ruled from. Her reflection shone in the polished wood. Carter walked in behind her, coat still damp from the rain. They want to name the judicial conference room after you, he said. Clara raised an eyebrow. I haven't died exactly. He smirked. It's weird. She smiled faintly, then turned serious. Are the reforms going to stick? Carter shrugged. Some will. Others will take time. Clara nodded. That's what they never tell you about justice. It's not a moment. It's erosion and rebuilding. He hesitated. You sure you want to do this? She turned to him. I have to. That afternoon, Clara stood before the State Judiciary Review Board. Flashes went off and mics clicked on. She cleared her throat. I am submitting my resignation. Gasps echoed in the room. I believe in the law. I believe in its power to protect, to punish, and to heal. But I also believe that institutions must be rebuilt by new hands. I lit a fire. It is not for me to stand in its glow. One of the board members stood. Judge Mays, your actions have inspired a movement. You could remain and lead that change. Clara smiled sadly. Change doesn't need a monument. It needs momentum. She turned to leave, but not before saying one last thing. Make sure the next woman who wears this robe doesn't have to fight the way I did just to be heard. 2 months later, she returned to her family's house in Mount Pleasant. The quiet was strange. The silence was no longer threatening, but cleansing. Her nephew biked in from school, his backpack swinging behind him. He saw her on the porch, dropped his bike, and ran up the steps. Auntie Clara, he shouted. She caught him in a hug, strong, long, and silent. I saw you on TV, he said into her shoulder. I know you made them listen. She pulled back and looked him in the eyes. I made them look. Listening, that's still up to them. He nodded solemnly, with the kind of understanding kids aren't supposed to have but often do. They sat on the porch as the sun began to set. The city still buzzed beyond the hills, but here it was calm. A breeze moved through the trees. Clara closed her eyes and exhaled. Not in surrender, but in peace. This isn't just a courtroom drama. It's a mirror held up to society. Racist cops slapped the wrong judge is a story about power, prejudice, and the price of silence. But more than that, it's about the courage to stand when others kneel, to speak truth when the world demands your quiet. Judge Clara may represent something we rarely see portrayed honestly. A woman of integrity who rises not through revenge, but through justice. She reminds us that no matter how strong the system may seem, it is built by people, and it can be changed by people, especially by those who've lived long enough to know what's truly worth fighting for. For older generations, this story hits a deeper nerve. You've seen the decades pass, witnessed injustice recycled in new forms, and yet hope remains when people like Clara refuse to back down. Her stand isn't just for herself. It's for the next generation, for her nephew, for the forgotten, for all of us. So, if this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Like this video if you believe truth still matters. Share it if you think someone needs to hear it. And subscribe if you want more stories that speak to the heart, honor justice, and challenge the silence. Because real justice isn't loud, but when it shows up, it echoes for generations.